In the 40s, there were some Russian researchers that kept 5 people awake for 15 days. They were using an experimental gas-based stimulant. They kept them in a sealed environment. They wanted to monitor their air intake since the gas was toxic in high concentrations. And this was before closed-circuit cameras, so they only had microphones and thick glass porthole windows to watch them. The chamber itself was stocked with books, cots with no mattresses, as well as running water, a toilet, and enough dried food to last all 5 of them for a month. They were political prisoners, deemed enemies of the state during World War II. For the first 5 days, everything was fine. The subjects hardly complained. They were promised, though falsely, that they would be freed if they submitted to this test and did not sleep for 30 days. Their conversations and activities were always monitored, and it was noted they continued to talk about increasingly traumatic incidents in their past. The general tone of the conversations took a darker aspect after the 4-day mark. After 5 days, they started to complain about the circumstances and events that eventually led them to where they were. They started to demonstrate severe paranoia, and they stopped talking to each other and started whispering into the microphones and into the portholes. They, for some reason, seemed to think that they could win the trust of the experimenters by turning over their comrades, and at first, the researchers suspected this was an effect of the gas itself. After the 9th day, that's when everything started to go to hell. The first of them started screaming. He ran the length of the chamber repeatedly, yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight, at which point he continued to attempt to scream, but he was only able to make the occasional squeak. The researchers postulated that he had physically torn his vocal cords. The most surprising thing about this was how the others reacted, or that they didn't. They continued to whisper into the microphones until the second of the captives started to scream. The 2 non-screaming captives took the books apart, smeared page after page with their own feces, and pasted them calmly over the glass portholes. The screaming stopped soon after, and so did the whispering in the microphones. 3 more days of this, and the researchers checked the microphones hourly to make sure they were still working. They thought it was impossible that no sound could, be occurring with 5 people inside. The oxygen consumption in the chamber indicated that all 5 must, still be alive. In fact, it was the amount of oxygen 5 people would consume at a very heavy level of strenuous exercise. When the morning of the 14th day came, the researchers did something they said they would not do to get a reaction from the captives. They used the intercom inside the chamber. They were hoping it would provoke any response from the people that they were afraid were either dead or vegetables by this point. I remember they announced, "We're opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom." After that, there was a disturbing voice that came from the other side.
"We no longer wish to be freed."
Debate immediately broke out among the researchers and military forces that were funding it. They weren't able to provoke any more responses using the intercom, so they finally decided to open the chamber at midnight on the 15th day. On that day, the chamber was flushed of the stimulant. It was filled with fresh air, and immediately voices from the microphone began to object. 3 different voices began begging, like they were pleading for their loved ones' lives, to turn the gas back on. The chamber was opened, and soldiers were sent inside to retrieve the test subjects. They began to scream louder than ever, and so did the soldiers when they saw what was inside. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, though no one could rightly say that it was actually life. The food rations past day 5 had not been so much as touched. There were chunks of meat from the dead test subjects' thighs and chest stuffed into the drain in the center of the chamber, blocking it and allowing 4 inches of water to accumulate on the floor. We don't know how much water was actually blood. And all 4 surviving test subjects also had large portions of muscle and skin torn away from their bodies. The destruction of flesh and exposed bone of their fingertips indicated that the wounds were inflicted by hand, not by teeth, like they thought. Closer examinations of the position and angles of those wounds indicated that most, if not all, were self-inflicted. The abdominal organs below the ribcage of all 4 test subjects had been removed. While the heart and lungs and diaphragm were still there, The skin of most of the muscles attached to the ribs had been ripped off. The lungs could be seen through the rib cage. All the blood vessels and organs remained intact, but they'd been taken out and laid on the floor, fanning out around the eviscerated but still living bodies of the subjects. The digestive tract of all four could be seen working, digesting food. But it quickly became apparent that what they were digesting was their own flesh that they had been ripping off and eating over the course of days. Most of the soldiers were Russian special operatives at the facility, but still, many refused to return to the chamber to remove the subjects. The subjects themselves continued to scream, to be left in the chamber, and begged and demanded that the gas be turned back on lest they fall asleep. To everyone's surprise, the test subjects put up a fierce fight, and in the process of being removed from the chamber, one of the soldiers died from having his throat ripped out. Another gravely injured by having his testicles ripped off, and an artery in his leg severed by one of the subject's teeth. Another 5 soldiers were lost, if you count them committing suicide in the weeks that followed. In the struggle, one of the 4 living subjects had his spleen ruptured and bled out almost immediately. The medical researchers attempted to sedate him, but this proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times the human dose of a morphine derivative and still fought like a cornered animal, breaking the ribs and an arm of one of the doctors. His heart was seen to beat for a full 2 minutes after he had bled out, to the point there was more air in his vascular system than blood. Even after it stopped, he continued to scream and flail for another 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach. He just kept repeating the word more, over and over, and weaker until he finally fell silent. The surviving 3 test subjects were heavily restrained and moved to a medical facility. The 2 with intact vocal cords continuously begged for the gas, demanding to be kept awake. The most injured of the 3 was taken to the only surgical operating room that the facility had. In the process of preparing the subject to have his organs placed back inside of him, it was found that he was effectively immune to the sedative. He was immune to the sedative that they had given him to prepare him for the surgery. He fought furiously against his restraint. When the anesthetic gas was brought out to put him under, he managed to tear most of the way through a 4-inch wide leather strap on one wrist, even with the weight of a 200-pound soldier holding that wrist. It only took a little more anesthetic than normal to put him under, and the instant his eyelids fluttered and closed, his heart stopped. In the autopsy of that test subject that died on the operating table, it was found that his blood had triple the normal level of oxygen. The muscles that were still attached to his skeleton were badly torn, and he had broken 9 bones in his struggle to not be subdued. Most of them were from the force his own muscles had exerted on them. The second survivor had been the first of the group of 5 to start screaming. His vocal cords destroyed, he was unable to beg or object to surgery, and he only reacted by shaking his head violently in disapproval when the anesthetic gas was brought near him. He shook his head yes when someone suggested, reluctantly, that they should try the surgery without anesthetic, and did not react for the entire 6-hour procedure, replacing his abdominal organs and attempting to cover them with what remained of his skin. The surgeon presiding stated repeatedly that it should not be medically possible for the patient to still be alive. One terrified nurse assisting the surgery stated that she had seen the patient's mouth curl into a smile several times whenever his eyes met hers. When the surgery ended, the subject looked at the surgeon and began to wheeze loudly, attempting to talk while struggling. Assuming this must be something of drastic importance, the surgeon had a pen and pad fetched, so the patient could write his message. It was simple. Keep cutting. The other 2 test subjects were given the same surgery, both without anesthetic as well, although they had to be injected with a paralytic for the duration of the operation. The surgeon found it impossible to perform the operation while the patients laughed continuously. Once paralyzed, the subjects could only follow the attending researchers with their eyes. The paralytic cleared their systems in an abnormally short period of time, and they were soon trying to escape their bonds. The moment they could speak, they were again asking for the gas. The researchers tried asking why they had injured themselves, why they had ripped out their own guts, and why they wanted to be given the gas again. Only one response was given.
I must remain awake.
All 3 subjects' restraints were reinforced, and they were placed back into the chamber, awaiting determination as to what should be done with them. The researchers, facing the wrath of their military benefactors for having failed the stated goals of their project, considered euthanizing the surviving subjects. The commanding officer, an ex-KGB, instead saw potential and wanted to see what would happen if they were put back on the gas. The researchers strongly objected, but inevitably were overruled. In preparation for being sealed in the chamber again, the subjects were connected to an EEG monitor and had their restraints padded for long-term confinement. To everyone's surprise, all 3 stopped struggling the moment it was let slip that they were going back on the gas. It was obvious at this point that all 3 were putting up a great struggle to stay awake. One of the subjects that could speak was humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject was straining his legs against the leather bonds with all his might. First his left, then right, then left again, for something to focus on. The remaining subject was holding his head off his pillow and blinking rapidly. Having been the first to have been wired to the EEG machine, most of the researchers were monitoring his brainwaves in surprise. They were normal most of the time, but sometimes flatlined inexplicably. It looked as if he were repeatedly suffering brain death before returning to normal. As they focused on the paper scrolling out of the brainwave monitor, only one nurse saw the man's eyes slip shut at that same moment his head hit the pillow. His brainwaves immediately changed to that of a deep sleep, and flatlined for the last time as his heart simultaneously stopped. The only remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed in now. His brainwaves showed the same flat lines as the one who had just died from falling asleep. The commander gave the order to seal the chamber with both subjects inside as well as 3 researchers. One of the named 3 immediately drew his gun and shot the commander point blank between his eyes, then turned the gun to the mute subject and blew his brains out as well. Finally, he pointed his gun at the remaining subject, still restrained to the bed as the remaining members of the medical and research team fled the room.
I won't be locked in here with these things. Not with you! What are you? I must know!
The bastard smiled.
Have you forgotten so easily? We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven we are not allowed to tread.
The researcher paused, then aimed at the subject's heart and fired. The EEG flatlined as the subject weakly choked out.
So nearly free.